All right, guys, so it's 2020, and right now there are seriously so many gimbals out there. The question is, do you absolutely need a gimbal to start out filmmaking?
Let's find out.
All right, roll the intro. All right, so the question is, do you really need a gimbal when starting out filmmaking? So I'm here with my good buddy Wesley Blaylock, and we're going to talk about this. Should you buy a gimbal? Should you not buy a gimbal? Do you need a gimbal? Let's figure it out.
So I'm Wesley Blaylock. I've been a filmmaker for the last 3 years. And one of the first piece of equipment that I bought was a Zhiyun Crane V2. I think it's one of the first ones. At the time in 2017, there was a lot of buzz on YouTube. A lot of filmmakers were using it to get that cinematic look. I mean, I've relied on it for wedding videos, even some documentary work, and really just never set it down.
So when I first started out, I bought a gimbal. That was one of the first things, and I never really focused on using a tripod or handheld stuff. I always used a gimbal, and so I think what that did was it caused me to not think about my framing and not think about the composition of my shot. I wasn't focused on if I had leading lines going to my subject in the shot, or focused on putting something in the foreground. How am I drawing the viewer to the subject of my shot? And those are very important things, and when I have a gimbal in my hand, I tend to not think about that stuff. I tend to think more about some type of moving motion. And me personally, I think if you were to just go tripod and actually think about the framing and the composition of your shot, it's gonna look a lot better than if you're holding a gimbal and you just get some random move.
I would say personally, some of the pros for the gimbal for me would be achieving that cinematic look. With a lot of the wedding films we create and even some commercial work, you really want that nice, buttery smooth, professional look. Now there's a lot of instances in some of the documentary work that I do where it just does not make sense. You would be a lot better off going handheld or tripod to kind of give it that feel or emotion of what you're trying to achieve. When you're out in the field doing run and gun stuff, and the buttery cinematic look just doesn't make sense.
What we're gonna do is we're gonna go outside and get a handful of different shots. And Wesley's actually gonna be on a gimbal. He's gonna be using the Zhiyun.
I'll be on the Zhiyun Crane 2, shooting on an EOS R.
Okay. And I'm gonna get my shots on a tripod and handheld, and I'll be using the Canon C200 to make it as fair as possible. We're both gonna be shooting at 35 millimeters, and we have a list of shots. We're both gonna try and get pretty much the same shots, but we have our list, and he's gonna film them how he films them with a gimbal, and then I'll film them how I film them on a tripod. So
let's get into it.
Let's jump outside. Okay, well, we just got back from shooting our shots downtown, and we had a small list of a couple different shots. And the list was, we had to get 2 different types of establishing shots downtown. So it was one wide and one close-up, which like I said, everything was filmed at 35 millimeters, so it's not like we could go super wide or super close. We got those 2 shots. We had to get 3 shots of someone running down the sidewalk, which was a wide shot, a close-up of the feet, and a close-up of the face. And then we got 2 more shots of someone sitting at a bench, and again, a wide shot and then a close-up. So let's check out the shots and see what we filmed and why we filmed it that way.
Cool. So we're gonna start off with my first shot, and this was kind of the downtown establishing shots. And kind of the reason I went with this shot and kind of the framing is, of course, one of the bad habits of shooting on a gimbal is I'm wanting to already, for this shot, I want to just go ahead and pan to the right. So as far as the framing goes, I got a little bit of the tree, wind blowing, some cars passing, and then I added in some panning to the right. Gives it a nice little cinematic feel to it. I was pretty happy with it.
Yeah, overall, I mean, it was a good looking shot. It was something, if I had a gimbal in my hand, I would have done the exact same thing. All right, and for my shot, I was on the tripod. I decided not to do any movement at all. I didn't do any panning, any tilting, just a complete stationary shot. And the reason I did that was because there was already cars driving by. There was already a lot of movement in the shot. And so I didn't feel I needed to add any more movement to this one. And so I framed it up, tried to get a nice line running down the center of the frame. We have a trash can and a tree in the foreground, and just kind of capturing an overall feel of downtown. And in my opinion, this is a shot that I would choose. I wouldn't go the gimbal route. I don't feel this shot needs to have any type of gimbal swooping around the tree. And this is just my opinion. I feel it takes away from the shot a little bit.
And that kind of goes back to the bad habits. There's, for the last 3 years, I've been on a gimbal, and, I'm so used to panning to the left, right, adding movement where movement's not needed. So for a shot, like he explained, perfectly, that, he's focusing on the composition and the framing, to where someone like me, I'm just trying to get that cinematic look where, I'm adding movement where there's already plenty.
Right. So. Cool. Well, let's go on to the next shot.
Cool. So for the next shot we did, it was pretty much still an establishing shot of the downtown area. We shot a pretty cool old building. And so I went with kind of a little different approach. So I did kind of a down pan with a gimbal, kind of walking backwards. And the reason I chose this is it kind of, you see the open sky and you don't really see the actual subject revealing yet. So as a viewer watching this clip, it's kind of revealing this magnificent old building. It's kind of like a reveal. So that was kind of my approach with it. Just kind of panning down to it. So nothing too crazy.
So the second one there, like Wesley said, there's a really cool old theater building here in downtown. So we chose that as our second shot. And once again, I'm on tripod. I decided to go just complete stationary shot, no pan, no tilt. And I shot through a sign and through a tree on the left, and there was wind blowing, so the tree had a little bit of movement, so it didn't look like a complete picture. And the reason I chose this frame, I kind of off-centered it a little bit because there was a nice little line that leads up to the plaza sign. And so you're looking through these 2 signs, and your focus is kind of drawn right toward the plaza sign. And having these 2 things in the foreground, the reason I shot in between them was because we're in a downtown area, and downtown areas are usually pretty packed. They're cluttered. There's a lot going on in downtown. So I just thought it may be a good choice to shoot in between 2 objects to make the frame seem a little more tight.
All right, and moving on to the next shot, we set up kind of a subject where we follow them running or walking. And for my first shot, I had Jeff across the street, kind of going through a walkway between two buildings. And since I was on a gimbal, I thought it'd kind of make for a pretty cool shot to just kind of follow Jeff going across the walkway and then follow him run. So for my next shot, I did an up close of his feet. Same thing with the gimbal, just kind of had it real low and walked same path, kept him kind of framed up in the middle. Then for my third shot, I kind of had Jeff still framed in the middle and kind of running backwards and kind of let him run out of frame. Kind of give you a little cinematic shot on that. So nothing too crazy.
So for my 3 shots, the first one I went on tripod just because you were walking. It's a bit slower pace. And the second you started running is when I switched over to handheld. And the first tripod shot, I tried to go across the street and kind of shoot the building at an angle. That way there was some type of lines kind of leading into you. And then the next 2 shots, while you're running, and I went handheld, which for these type of shots, I think going handheld is completely necessary because we have a subject who's running. He's running from something. And so I think adding the shakiness, the handheld movement, it really just helps put the viewer into your situation by having a lot of jerky movement.
And I can agree with that. So like going back to some of the shots I set up on the gimbal, you know, kind of neglected the framing, kind of just focus more on the subject kind of going across. And you know, I can kind of agree when we cut into the up close shots of, you know, the feet running and the front of you running kind of past the camera, you know, it's nice and polished. So you kind of lose that raw emotion of, you know, it's kind of hectic, you're running, and it looks more like I would say almost like a commercial look, you know, like Adidas commercial or something like that. So for our next set of shots, we actually did a pretty simple shot. We had our subject just sitting on a bench in downtown. And for my choice of shot is I wanted to kind of have my gimbal down low. And of course, the good old trusty gimbal pan to the right, adding a little bit of movement. You know, I thought for a stationary shot kind of like this, it might be nice to add a little bit of a movement pan. So for my second shot, I did kind of just a small up close on Jeff kind of on his phone. And of course added a little bit of a pan to give it that cinematic look. Wasn't too worried on framing, kind of just focused in on that subject.
All right, so for my 2 shots, I did both of these on the tripod. The first one was just a complete stationary, staring directly at the subject. I didn't want to do any panning, any movement. I could see he was already moving a little bit, and then we caught a car driving behind us, so that added some movement in the shot. But also, because the subject's just sitting there on his phone, there's nothing crazy happening, so I don't think you need any type of movement to show the audience what's going on. And on the second shot, I just did a pan up from his phone to his face. Simple shot, nothing too crazy. The thing I did try and focus on though was the spot where I landed up on his face. There was buildings in the background, and those buildings gave a really nice line directly up to Wesley's eyes.
After reviewing all the footage and kind of seeing the gimbal versus the handheld and tripod, one thing I'm noticing is I've got a pretty bad habit of neglecting, you know, the framing, because when you're adding that movement, you know, usually your whole frame is going to be sliding to the right, you know, or you're going to be completely revealing a whole new part of the scene that you couldn't see at the beginning. So bad habit with me on the gimbal is, you know, I'm really focused in on the subject, and I'm kind of neglecting leading lines and, depth of field. A lot of what you can make a huge difference on on a tripod shot.
Yeah, I agree, and that's the same problem I had for pretty much most of my career until I just kind of let the gimbal go. But until I did that and actually kind of got back to the basics and said, okay, I need to focus more on my framing. And because that was always a huge thing on my mind was, okay, I have a gimbal, I want to add movement. So taking that gimbal away, now, okay, I can focus a lot more on the framing and the composition of my shot. And how am I going to get the viewer how are their eyes going to move toward the subject? What can I do to make their eyes go toward the subject of the shot? And so those are just things that, when you're handheld or when you're on a tripod, you tend to think a lot more about the composition and the framing of your shot.
That's something I could agree to. When you're on a gimbal and you're run and gun, you neglect a lot of the basic filmmaking, framing guidelines. It's just so easy to get into that habit of just adding that movement when it's really not needed.
All right, so that's pretty much our shot review of what we went out and filmed today. And I do want to cover, I'm not knocking gimbals at all. I have a gimbal myself. I still use it. I don't use it nearly as much as I used to. I actually rarely use it now because I do want to focus more on the framing and the lines and the composition of my shot. But if you're for a gimbal, use your gimbal. I would encourage you to keep those things in the back of your mind. How is your shot framed? Where's your subject at? Is there any lines leading up to your subject? And so I think those are just crucial things to always just keep in mind throughout filmmaking.
And to hopefully just break some of the, the bad habits of a gimbal and kind of, expand your filmmaking knowledge. There's plenty of times that a gimbal is needed and it's necessary. But as you grow that experience, you could probably do a lot more handheld on a tripod and put the three together to make some really cool content.
Totally. Yeah, I completely agree with that. And there's definitely a right time and place for a gimbal on most shoots. Not all of them, but most of them. All right, guys, thank you for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. And most importantly, I hope you learned something from this. I think there's a lot to be learned between the three of these things: gimbals, tripods, handheld. They all have their purpose. They all have their right place in the right time. So do not forget to subscribe to the channel. At very least, hook your boy up with a like the video. Come on now.
But also, make sure you let us know down in the comments of what clips you liked better. Did you lean towards more of the gimbal shots, or did you like the handheld tripod shots more? And let us know why. We're interested of why you guys, might like those shots better.
Definitely. And thank you, Wesley, for coming and helping out with this video today.
For sure. It was a lot of fun, man. It's always curious, or I'm always curious of just seeing, how the different shots pan out. So it was fun.
All right. We'll see you guys next time.
Y'all take care. That was good. You're going good.